Okay, I can't imagine that the camera will do this justice in any way. But my goodness, there's like a filtered sunset just catching Mount Shem and Lady Peak and Thurston Peak, but it's practically dark out everywhere, but still picking up the peaks there. Boy, that is something else. Okay. Yeah, kind of a haunting view. I love it. So I've made a lot of videos that through which are sprinkled brief comments. I think there's one also that has a little more information just about the brushes that I use. I think this video will, rather than adding anything else to it, we'll just talk about the brushes that I use and why I use them. One of my subscribers, Marty, had asked in the comments if I could direct her to a video that talks about my approach to my brushwork, and I hope I'm able to cover that in this video. In many cases it would really be worth your while to just, many of my videos I have close-ups of my handwork with the brush on a canvas. It would really help if you just watched the motion of the hand and how the brush turns as I'm applying the paint. But we're not going to get into that. It's easier I think it's easier to learn from watching than it is from hearing a description often. So I'll describe things as best as I can now, and beyond that, yeah, I would suggest you look at videos and try to find something, because there are many where there are close-ups of me actually painting. And just watch the brush, just watch the nature of how it's handled. Okay, so I guess the first thing I'll bring up just to get things going, and I know, I know many of you guys have heard me say this, but for some of our new subscribers, maybe not so. So I only use round or flat brushes. I don't use filbert, fan, like none of that stuff. I just don't need it. So my brushes are always boar's hair, with the exception of one brush that I keep strictly for signatures, and that's sable. Sable's good hair if you get into, well, different mediums and some really fine work. I don't do that. I like boar's hair because it is a little rough around the edges, literally and figuratively. And I get pretty fussy about some of my brushwork as it is. If I were to get even fussier, the painting would tighten up too much. And tightening up a painting is something I'm constantly fighting with. I want to stay a little bit looser. Okay, my sizes. The sizes that I use, both in round and flat, are numbers 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. I rarely go larger or smaller. And in fact, I've never gone larger. I've never gone smaller either. The ones that I use the most common are a 6 and an 8, and sometimes a 4, just for smaller details. Okay, I wrote a few things down here because, of course, I'll forget half of what I want to say. Okay. I use the largest brush that I can for a given job on the painting. If I think I could, carve in around a branch somewhere and do a very tidy job with a number 4, I will not use a number 2 because I think I can use it, because I can make it even cleaner or even tidier. I'll stick with the 4, and I'll just forgive any anomalies or inaccuracies of my application. To me, that brings character to a painting. I don't want things to be too tight again. So I always use the biggest brush that I can for a given task on the painting. That's just called economy of stroke. The better job that you can do of applying the paint with the largest brush possible, the more painterly the canvas will appear in its final stage. That's a skill that takes practice. So yeah, and practice isn't something I can help you with. You just got to do it yourself. Okay, I think of a brush as a pretty forgiving applicator. When I'm using my brush on a painting, you know, I won't paint like this, okay? I never do that just with the oils. I'll do it during the wash-in when I thin my oils off. And by the way, we're only talking about oil paintings tonight. I'll thin it off with turpentine paint thinner, you know, mineral spirits, whatever you're using, it's all fine. And then I'll scrub in large areas. Then you're kind of brushing it, right? When I'm washing a painting in, I'll only use a brush that's pretty worn down, you know, this kind of thing. Because I don't want to take a nice new brush. Because scrubbing a painting in or washing a painting in is very hard on a brush because you're wiping over that gesso covered canvas, and it's basically sandpaper, so it's really hard on your bristles. But I'm not going to take a brush like this that still has shoulders. I talk about shoulders sometimes, and that's the square edges on a flat brush. I like that because I can use those, you know, as a tool to make actually a remarkably thin line or a fat line. So yeah, I just use a really worn out brush for that kind of thing. That's when I'm truly brushing. Other than that, I just think of the brush as an applicator, and I will very lightly lay paint on in different areas. And when I'm doing that, if this is my canvas surface, I'm not laying paint on like this, because then you're scraping off as much as you're putting on. I'm doing it lightly, and I'm keeping my brush almost, see that, almost parallel to the canvas surface. And I'm not applying a lot of pressure, I'm just letting it fall on almost. There are some times when I push a little bit harder, but not much. So again, an applicator more than a brush. Brush is the name, applicator. Brush is the name, it's not so much the verb. How's that? So flat versus round brushes. It's a bit of a difficult thing to say because there are no blank statements you can make about it. It depends so entirely on the context in which you use them. I recently saw on another video on YouTube that somebody said that a flat brush holds much more paint than a round brush does. I disagree completely with that. Well, not completely. I'll provide some context for, I'm guessing, why this statement was made. Okay, look at that. It's a shovel, right? Holds a lot of paint. So you can scoop up, if you're only using raw straight paint, even if you add a little medium to it, it still scoops a lot of paint on the surface of the brush. These are both number 12 brushes. The round one on the right, sorry, I guess that's your left, if you're just using straight paint, sort of impasto thick oil paint, it's true, it doesn't hold as much paint. But if you're mixing mediums into it, and in my case that's linseed oil, and if I'm working and if I don't want to go too impasto-ish, and I just want to cover some ground, this will keep going and going. This will run out of paint almost immediately because it's thin, and this is a lot fatter no matter how you look at it. The density of the density and the number of hairs might be similar between these two, but this applies. It's sort of like the initial application applies a lot, but it diminishes very quickly. This, you can just keep laying it on and laying it on, and as you go on, you can press harder and harder and harder. So it really depends on whether you're using a medium or not. One thing about, okay, so that's the loadability of the brush, handling of the brush. I just like the look of a square brush stroke on a painting. If I'm painting rocks, well, if I'm painting anything in general, I like this. I have, as I have recently, I will use this for the sky because I like it to be softer, more flowing, more gentle. I'll use this for more structure because I can achieve more easily some harder lines with this thing. Another thing, when you're using a flat brush and you lay your brush on, or you lay your stroke on, there's pretty much equal pressure across the base of the brush putting your paint on. You don't tend to squish ridges out so much from the sides, because as you apply pressure, that paint wants to go somewhere. Sure, part of it goes on the canvas, but part of it wants to squeeze out the sides. Now, if you use a round brush, there's a lot of strength in the very center of this brush. On the edges, there isn't so much. So what happens is, as you're applying the paint and you apply more pressure, there's a ton of pressure in the center of your stroke and very little on the outside edges of your stroke. So you will tend to push paint out from the center of your stroke and end up with ridges easily on the outside. You also tend to lose control of where your colors are, your various colors are within your one brush stroke. And very often when you're painting, one brush stroke can mean several colors are going to appear. Because unless you mix the heck out of it, if you're house painting, fine, it's all going to be the same. But if you don't overmix your paint and you try to lay it on in an impressionist manner, then it allows you to keep that paint unmixed as you're laying it on the canvas. It's just a bit of an aid that way. So something I do quite a bit of when I'm painting is I will roll the brush from one side to the other. Now I've got a wide stroke, now I have a narrow stroke, now I have a wider stroke again. That gives you a bit of variety of color within your stroke, and it changes the stroke. With a flat brush, you can see the huge, the massive difference in stroke shape as you move. So you're kind of sculpting things as you are not brushing your paint, but applying your paint to the surface. That's a flat brush. A round brush, the difference that you can make in width is by rolling, but also applying varying pressures as you're working your way up a stroke. But it doesn't give you the same leverage as far as shaping your stroke is concerned. Both are fine. They're just different. I don't know. When I go into a painting, typically if it's a small one, I'll use a brush. It doesn't happen often that I'll use a painting knife on a small painting. I'll reserve the knife for mid-sized to larger paintings. But I don't know most of the time whether I'm going to do that when I'm at the stage of charcoal drawing or even washing in. It really just depends on my mood. There's no hard and fast rule there. Now I know I have nothing against anybody using the brush on flat, on edge, using the stem of the brush. You see that many painters do that. You see all kinds of objects used to apply paint. What I feel, though, easily happens is that a person can use these various means of application as stencils to make up for their lack of ability to use a brush. Again, the fewer the implements you use, I think the better painter you are. Yeah, it's a handicap. My goodness, I was taught to use a lot of handicaps, you know? I've done a lot of small paintings just using a brush this size, and only that one brush. Forced to do it because that's how you learn how to paint. Best exercise going. But as you progress and as you get better at things, I have no problem with, personally I have no problem with anybody who wants to use anything. Use a teacup for all I care. If I could make some of the paintings that I make and just use the blunt end of a 2x4 or the square end of a 2x4, boy, I'd be a much better painter than I am. But I couldn't do it no matter what. I don't think anybody can. So, it's sort of you've got to sort of decide where's your happy ground. How many different implements do you want? I don't like fan brushes because, well, they hold almost no paint. And I see them often used as an excuse for the inability to paint boughs on, for example, a pine tree. You can use it almost as a not a stencil, but a stamp. It's already crescent shaped. We put a little paint on there and we dab, 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 dab. I'm not seeing that as painting. Personally, it is entirely personal. It makes for good bits of bunch grass in different areas too. But that's because of the shape of the brush. Well, I can, in my opinion, do the same thing in a much more interesting way by using a regular brush and changing the angle of my hand, the angle of the brush, the pressure of the brush. That's just how I was trained. I just prefer it. I can easily spot when shortcuts have been taken on a painting. I don't need to be told it. I can just look at it. And frankly, art buyers and collectors are sophisticated enough easily to recognize that as well. Not that it's always a bad thing, because part of the creation of a painting can be using multiple objects. That's why I don't want to come down too hard on one way or the other. But that's how I see it. That's how I prefer to do things. Limit the diversity of my tools. Limit the shapes. The biggest difference I go is on one painting, a round brush and a flat brush together. Now I have done knife paintings where, as a cheat, I've used a small brush just to reinstate a few lines here and there that I mistakenly wiped out with the knife or what have you. Little cheating here and there. I do it. I think everybody does. But in general, like I say, I was taught that if you're going to do knife painting, use a knife. If you're doing a brush painting, use a brush. But, hey, that's just me. Okay, I think I wrote a few things down. I didn't think there was a whole lot to write down, actually. Yeah, I think I've got that covered. Again, I'm much better at just illustrating on the canvas while I'm painting, and I'm not going to make a separate illustration. I'm not a teaching channel. I just invite you to come along and glean what you can from not just me yapping incessantly, which happens enough already, but watch the movements of the brush and how I'm rolling it between my fingers, how I'm handling the brush while I'm painting things. You'll learn much more from that than you will from me shooting my mouth off. I do hope that helps a lot, or at least a bit. Thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Bye. Before I go, I just want to reiterate this. Round earthers, flat earthers. People do argue about this. And again, keep it in context. It is so dependent on the consistency, the viscosity of your medium. They behave very differently depending on whether you take it raw out of the tube or whether you add linseed oil and mix it in. Neither's better. Personal preference.